Hey friends, today we're checking out Oversimplified and the Napoleonic Wars Part 2, but before we get into that, there's something that's been bugging me. Did you ever notice how much Napoleon looks kind of like Gene from Bob's Burgers? I saw it the other day and now I can't shake it from my mind. Welcome back, friends, and a special welcome to all the new friends out there. I'm YoBGS. Today, I'm back to finish out the Napoleonic Wars series. Last time I checked, Napoleon was playing Risk while pretty much everyone else was playing checkers, and he was able to just sort of dominate everything that he was trying to do. So I'm looking forward to seeing where he goes with basically unchecked power. If you want to give me unchecked power, awesome segue there, make sure to subscribe. Subscribing is the best way to get these videos out to as many people as possible, and I appreciate it more than you know. It also lets me know that you want to see more of these kinds of videos, and I've got some original ones in the works pretty soon. I'm hoping that you'll like those, but here we go, Napoleonic Wars Part 2.
After the Third and Fourth Coalition Wars, Napoleon had decisively defeated all three of his main rivals on the continent, and he was now undoubtedly the master of Europe. After the Battle of Friedland, his enemies sued for peace, and they all met on a raft on a river for negotiations.
Now, big shout out, by the way, to everybody who explains a lot of the random questions I ask. I know I try my best to read every comment and reply to as many of them as possible. And some people explained to me, yes, you can in fact sue for peace. And well, now we know that this is sort of what it looks like. But I just want to say, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to help me out, because the dumb questions I ask, I really am trying to learn.
They had been fighting for the past 4 years, but now Napoleon and Alexander surprisingly got along like a house on fire. They laughed together. They chatted long into the night. They kissed. The two...
What? I mean, probably not like that. Wait, and why? I didn't know Facetune existed back then.
They chatted long into the night. They kissed. The two had a lot of mutual respect, and Napoleon even told his wife that if Alexander were a woman, I would make him my mistress. Kind of a weird thing to say to your wife, Napoleon. In the end...
Also, isn't Napoleon's wife kind of making a lot of men... her mister?
They came to an amicable agreement. Russia would lose barely any land, and in return, they'd join France against the UK and invade Sweden. Win-win. On the other hand, Frederick William III was sidelined, and Prussia...
The tracksuit, for real? I'm assuming that stereo... Oh my god. I didn't even notice anime Napoleon at that. I was too focused on the tracksuit.
On the other hand, Frederick William III was sidelined, and Prussia lost...
Do you have a kid's large asking for Napoleon?
...an enormous amount of territory to French client states. Only the UK remained as the last major threat to Napoleon, and they continued to be a big thorn in his side, constantly funding his enemies and using their powerful navy to wreak havoc on French trade and overseas colonies. But what could Napoleon do? The British were safe across the channel. Well, he said, if
I have to go back because you can't see this, although I'm sure you've seen this before if you're watching a reaction to it, but this is a big time Monday mood up here. Ah, no, I hit the wrong button.
We're safe across the channel. Well, he said, if I can't fight you with guns, I'll fight you with money. Earlier in 1806, Napoleon had announced...
See, even in that regard, Napoleon is warring in ways that people hadn't even thought about. I mean, that's basically how we fight wars in 2022. It's all money.
The continental system, a total shutoff of the UK from continental trade. No one in Europe was to trade with Britain, and Napoleon hoped that by hitting their economy, he could force them to negotiate. The British economy did take a hit, and
I love these economy graphs, no matter what country it is. Tea for everyone, crumpets for everyone, oh crumbs, and, well, we don't really like that one very much.
They responded in their typical fashion, by going to Copenhagen and blowing a bunch of stuff up. But in general, the British managed to stay afloat by simply increasing their trade with other parts of the world. Many neutral countries found themselves stuck between a rock and a hard place, as the two European superpowers demanded they cease trade with the enemy. Hey America, you better not trade with the French, or else I'll come burn down the White House. What? This is gonna wreck my economy. I need to start saving money. How the heck am I gonna start saving money? Yeah, that's right, you know where this is going.
No! Oh my god, that was the most seamless sponsor mention ever. By the way, Oversimplified face reveal. Talk about a handsome dude. I hear his business cards are laminated.
Do you like shopping in store? Of course not. Then you'd have to get up and use your legs.
This is a commercial for honey. Ladies and gentlemen, you may want to use honey if you are looking for honey because, well, honey is the finest way to save money on all the things that honey can save you money on. They've not been involved in any major scandals, at least not to the extent of my knowledge. If you want to support OverSimplified, but you're like me, you're too poor to join the Patreon, you want to go to honey.com/oversimplified. Join honey.com. Honey.com is probably an adult website. Don't go there. Join honey.com. And then you use his referral link for referral link stuff. Always nice when I can use my relevant experience to help somebody out.
Where are we? Oh yeah. Making peace with the Russians, a continental blockade, and blowing up Copenhagen. Sick of being blown up for doing almost nothing, and under significant pressure from Napoleon, the Danish officially sided with France. But Napoleon's blockade had the biggest effect on continental Europe, who were now cut off from a major trading partner, one that controlled the seas and held a rich, growing empire. And a lot of countries didn't fully comply. Portugal, a traditional British ally, refused to take part. No problem. Napoleon sent an army and invaded. But it wasn't just Portugal. Many of Napoleon's allies were also suspect. Your Majesty, it seems that Spain isn't properly enforcing your blockade. Spain? Why not? Well, it appears they've been trying to find a way out of being your ally since they lost their...
I wasn't realizing that there was an actual logistical reason for that. I just loved, why aren't they doing what I said? Oh, basically they don't want to be your friend anymore.
Fleet at Trafalgar. What is with these people? It's almost like everyone's only pretending to be my ally because they know otherwise I'd beat them up. Do I even have any real friends? Are you my friend, Pierre? Say yes or I'll slap you. Napoleon had come to mistrust his ally to the south, and in particular...
this was something else. Can I see?
Are you my friend, Pierre?
He kind of does it here. I swear it was more in part one. It always looked like Napoleon has his hand in his pocket. Somebody told me the reason Napoleon always has his hand in his shirt is he had, like, ridiculous abdominal pain, and so in all the paintings and stuff, he's painted with, like, his hand over his stomach, because that was basically how he lived.
Say yes or I'll slap you.
I thought that was
Napoleon
cool.
had come to mistrust his ally to the south, and in particular, Napoleon thought the Spanish royal family were an incompetent mess. All right, Carlos, you've got to get it together. How can I trust you when all you do is go hunting? Meanwhile, you let this ambitious nobody who dislikes me run the country, and you seem to be the only person in the universe who doesn't realize he's boinking your wife. And what's worse...
Wait a minute. Napoleon is really gonna be the one to call out somebody for boinking someone else's wife? Pot, meet kettle. You're Napoleon.
Who the heck are you? I'm the king's son. I just overthrew my dad. So, actually, now I'm the king. You people are the biggest cluster of shameless, narcissistic idiots and all around just the worst people I've ever met. Here, have a Kid's Choice Award. French forces.
What?
Here, have...
Oh. I see. Instead of Nickelodeon, it's...
Have a Kid's Choice.
I just can't pronounce that word because it's going to sound like I'm saying something bad.
Award. French forces, many having conveniently already entered Spain to invade Portugal, occupied Spanish forts, and Napoleon invited the Spanish royals to France to help mediate their differences.
Hey, welcome back to Dr. Bonaparte. We've got... Dr. Bonaparte. Okay, Dr. Bonaparte sounds like it would be an adult film parody of itself, right?
We're here
Bonaparte by name, Bonaparte by reputation.
with the royal family of Spain. So, Fernando, you've been accused of plotting against your father and vying for the Spanish throne. What do you have to say for yourself? Well, Napoleon, I just think great. Well, I've got the test results right here.
He is the
Fernando,
father.
in the case of the Spanish throne, you are not the king. And Carlos, you are also
Oh no,
not
Napoleon's
the
the king! The plot twist!
I'm the king!
What? Bum bum ba-dum.
Actually,
Bum, bum, ba-dum, bum.
Napoleon made his brother the king, but for all intents and purposes, Spain was now his puppet. He expected the Spanish people to be over the moon at the removal of their unpopular royal family. Imagine his surprise when it turned out that people don't really like to be subjugated by a foreign power, least of all one who had previously attacked the Catholic Church. And so the people of Spain revolted. Brutal fighting broke out as bands of armed Spaniards ambushed French troops across the kingdom, and vicious atrocities were committed on both sides. In addition to fighting the regular Spanish and Portuguese forces, the French had to contend with tens of thousands of guerrilla fighters throughout the Spanish countryside. The British even took the opportunity to land an army led by the future Duke of Wellington. And now, British forces were defeating French ones on land. Napoleon briefly went to Spain in person, and he did drive back the Allied armies, but before long, his attention was needed elsewhere. The whole thing became a nightmare for the emperor.
And this is where I feel like this is where training is the form of leadership that, at least up to a certain point in time, was greatly missing. Because you notice that when Napoleon is near or at the battlefield commanding all of the troops, it's the innovation, it's the pulling stuff out of his hat, it's coming up with new tactics, but the second he's not there, nobody else learned, from the Napoleon school of war, and they immediately start giving up ground again.
He excelled at traditional warfare, but this was something more akin to Napoleon's Vietnam. The whole conflict would keep hundreds of thousands of French soldiers and resources bogged down for years. Napoleon was never able to break the will of the Spanish people, and this problem weakened his position in Europe. Hey, Francis, want to go to war with Napoleon?
Something tells me this isn't how it happened, but I love this idea.
Hey, Francis, want to go to war with Napoleon again? Oh, I don't know, Britain. He's already whomped me 3 times. I'll give you £1 bazillion. Well, okay. Seeing that Napoleon was now caught up in Spain, and with some British funding, Austria decided...
See, one, that's Dogecoin. 2, that's like worthless right now. I thought Britain was broke too. I guess it's that situation of like anyone can just print money if they want to. But no, because we're learning that most world leaders have been dumb, throughout history. Because I'm like, you figure he would have realized that Britain is broke and that their money, even at a bazillion of it, is not very valuable. But no, just no.
Maybe, just maybe, this time they'd have a chance. So did they? No. Napoleon defeated them in just 4 months. It was quick, but it wasn't exactly easy. The Austrians had been watching Napoleon and learning, and they had made some reforms, while Napoleon, after years of war, was increasingly having to rely on inexperienced conscripts. So this time, the Austrians gave him a run for his money. The Fifth Coalition saw some of the bloodiest battles to date, including Napoleon's first major defeat, and when he did finally defeat the Austrians at the Battle of Wagram, it was a very costly victory.
Wow. Yeah, 74,000. I mean, that seems like one of the more costly battles we would see up until like the Civil War, like the American Civil War. Because I know that there were some there, I think maybe Gettysburg, with like 100,000 plus casualties.
Still, Napoleon had yet again
longer.
kicked Francis's butt, and as part of the peace terms, Austria lost a bunch more land. Not long after, however, Napoleon and Francis came to another agreement. It was decided that Napoleon would marry Francis's young daughter. But wait, doesn't Napoleon already have a wife?
Yeah, but first of all, that's not me. I can't wear fitted hats because I have a really big head. But I would assume Napoleon, they have the guillotine in France and they use it. And so I'm guessing Napoleon is newly single at this point.
Well, yes, he did. Josephine and Napoleon had become quite fond of one another, but now that Napoleon was playing the monarch game, he needed a male heir, and his aging wife wasn't giving him one, so it was out with the old and in with the new. At least he didn't behead anyone. For Austria, they felt that if Napoleon was going to keep on winning, they may as well be on his side. So through the marriage, Napoleon got an alliance with Austria and a beautiful baby potato. Between the failing blockade...
Okay, here he looks even more like Jean. Or like... I don't know, some sort of weird cross between like Jean and like Cartman.
Beautiful baby potato. Between the failing blockade
like
against Britain, the ongoing war in Spain, and now his recent struggles in Austria, cracks in Napoleon's invincibility were beginning to show. But still, look at this map. So blue, so beautiful. Even Sweden, after being pulverized by Russia, overthrew their king, and after an interesting chain of events, ended up putting one of Napoleon's own marshals in charge. Marshal Bernadotte took the name Karl Johan and became Crown Prince of Sweden after agreeing to join.
But you learn this in Risk, right? You can hold Europe, but the second you start going into parts of Asia or trying to build up forces on the outskirts of Europe, that's when somebody is going to take you down. Australia is where it's at. If you're going to take over the world, all the purples, and then you just,
Napoleon's continental system. For now, Sweden was Team France. Napoleon was on top of the world. He had won an endless string of victories. All he had to do now was sit back and not make any major miscalculations that could completely turn the tide of war.
Duck.
So let's see what comes next.
Run.
France's alliance with Russia was a terrifying prospect. Together, the two could have been unstoppable. But unfortunately, the alliance didn't last. The Russians felt they weren't getting a fair deal. Napoleon's Duchy of Warsaw right on their doorstep was a bit of an insult. And then their economy began to tank because of Napoleon's British blockade. And eventually, they began to open up trade. Your Majesty, it seems Alexander is no longer abiding by the continental system and has begun trading with the British. Alexander?
Oh boy. And we've learned what happens when people decide not to be friends with Napoleon anymore.
But he kissed me. He kissed you? You
did.
wouldn't get it, Pierre. No one would ever kiss you.
Aww.
The security of Napoleon's empire depended on removing the British threat, and he wasn't happy with Russia's backdoor shenanigans. And so in
This is the cheekiest anything Russian has ever looked. Except for, Edward Kill, the Trollolo guy.
In 1812, Napoleon decided to go to war. He gathered together the most massive army Europe had ever seen, made up of troops from every corner of his empire, and he prepared to invade. Okay, it looks like Napoleon's coming for us. Generals, I need ideas. We could stand and fight. No, that's stupid. You're stupid. We could run away. You.
Yes.
You're a star.
Oh man, dude, run away, wait for winter. And look, the Russian winter is the greatest military defense mechanism in history.
Napoleon's tactics relied on astonishing speed to outmaneuver his enemy and force a quick, decisive battle. Well, I've got two words for you. Scorched earth. If his opponent retreated while scorching the earth, his men couldn't live off the land. And if his men couldn't live off the land, he needed his supply trains. And if he needed his supply trains, he couldn't move quickly. And if he couldn't move quickly, he couldn't outmaneuver his enemy. And if he couldn't outmaneuver his enemy, I think you get the point. Napoleon launched his invasion and hoped for a quick battle. But all he could do was try to catch the retreating Russians.
Dude, I'm sitting here stunned at he's losing so many troops.
Napoleon launched his invasion and hoped for a quick battle, but all he could do was try to catch the retreating Russians.
You can't put F's in chat fast enough for these guys.
While moving deeper and deeper into hostile territory. As he went, the horribly hot summer devastated his army. His men died of heat, exhaustion, and disease. Supplies began to run out, and his men began to starve. Many deserted, and still the Russians continued to retreat. Numerous times, Napoleon considered turning back, but that little voice in his head kept on telling him, keep going. Just a little further. And don't worry, you're definitely average height.
Oh my
for
god. Okay, wait a minute. We talk about the Napoleon complex, right? You know, a shorter guy wanting to be a big man. The whole concept of overcompensating. So is it any surprise that Napoleon's invasion is looking like a... Just saying. He could have... Look, Russia's big. He could have invaded anywhere in Russia. And he had to make a nice phallic-shaped dent in the Russian populace.
He nearly caught the Russians at Smolensk, but it was his birthday, so he had a party instead. When he finally reached Moscow, he predicted the Russians wouldn't be willing to give up such a historic and holy city without a fight. And he was right.
Wrong.
The Russians finally turned to face him for the...
Good lord, but he's down... Okay, so decimating, people use that word wrong all the time, is when you're down to 1/10 of your men. And he's almost been decimated just by nature.
The single deadliest day of the Napoleonic Wars, the Battle of Borodino. The Russians fought valiantly, and as he got older, Napoleon's battle tactics seemed to become a little less refined and a little more run straight at the enemy, try not to die. He launched a full frontal assault at the Russian defenses, and as a result, the death toll was colossal. The Russians eventually decided to retreat, leaving Moscow to fall into Napoleon's hands. Quick, the French are taking the city. Release all these prisoners immediately, and tell them to burn it to the ground. Well, well, Jimmy the arsonist, you are not going to believe your luck.
Shouldn't he be in a bathtub? And why do they get nice... If you want to shine like a sun, first burn like a sun. And then we got like I can't see what those say.
Well, Jimmy the arsonist.
Why does he have Guy Fieri's shirt?
You are not going to believe your luck. Moscow went up in flames, and as Napoleon entered, it became very clear his army wouldn't be able to stay there very long. But he had just defeated the Russian army and taken their most beloved city. In his mind, he had won. So he sent Tsar Alexander in St. Petersburg a letter. Your Imperial Majesty, Napoleon requests your surrender. How shall I respond? You shan't, Dmitri. Ever? Ever. But,
He ghosted
Your
him!
Majesty, it will be winter soon. The French forces are stuck 500 miles into Russian territory with dwindling supplies. If we don't say anything, well, then they'll all die. Oh!
The smile coming out of nowhere was what made it for me.
Then they'll all die. Oh! After waiting for a response for about
It makes this level of smug so satisfying too.
Oh! After waiting for a response for about a month, the first snow of winter began to fall, and Napoleon sensed the catastrophe that was about to unfold. He decided their only choice now was to get out. And that's when it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. His glorious invasion had just become a race for survival. As the Russians realized the French were fleeing for their lives, they began to close in on their supply line. Men froze to death, their horses as well. There was starvation and disease. The injured and dying could only be left by the side of the road, as it was too slow to try to carry them. And all along the way,
Well, not to mention each person at this point would be carrying 6 dudes because they down to 1/6 of what they have left.
dreaded Russian Cossacks stalked the bleeding French army, and every now and then swept in for a quick attack. Napoleon, fearing capture, kept a vial of poison around his neck. At one point, the Russian armies nearly trapped him against the Berezina River, but a little Napoleon cleverness gave him the old Geoffrey juke, tricking them into thinking he was going south and then escaping across rapidly built pontoon bridges to the north. When the Russians realized where he was and began to close in, the French burned the bridges before everyone could cross. Hundreds drowned, and thousands were captured. At this point, Napoleon got wind of plots against him forming in Paris, so he abandoned his men and went back to France. The remaining
Why? Okay, why didn't Britain launch some sort of invasion at this point? Because it sounds like Napoleon garnered basically every troop that he could possibly get his hands on. So it would seem like Britain catching wind of the fact that, oh my God, there's 750,000 people marching on Moscow would, you know, hit here, hit here, hit here, sail around Spain, come up from the south, like, attack everything.
French stragglers made it across the border. It's been estimated over 600,000 men went into Russia. Less than 100,000 returned. Napoleon was now in a very precarious situation. His army had just been obliterated, and the other European leaders smelled blood. Here was an opportunity to take advantage of a weakened Napoleon, regain territory and influence, and liberate Europe from his dirty French paws. And so, they began to turn. Prussia soon broke their alliance and switched sides, while Austria declared neutrality. Even Sweden, led by one of Napoleon's old marshals, joined the Allies, partly due to Napoleon's earlier invasion of Swedish Pomerania.
Why?
The War of the Sixth Coalition had begun. The coalition forces had been reforming their armies, and they were now much better. And the UK had also significantly amped up its financial aid to its continental allies. Their armies quickly
Where is this money coming from? If they're not allowed to trade anywhere.
advanced through Poland and into Germany. In Paris, Napoleon was understandably freaking out. He needed to put together a new army fast, and he called up over 100,000 new conscripts, mostly teenagers. He also put his factories into overdrive, and he was like, you, make more rifles. You, build new cannons. You, make more horses. I don't make horses. Then who makes horses? Horses make horses. Explain how. Well, when a daddy horse and a mommy horse love each other very much. Yes, go on. Well, then
There's something about Napoleon hearing about breeding from a guy that he's spanking that I feel like I need an
the
adult.
daddy horse. I'm sorry, Napoleon. You're 43. I thought you'd know this stuff. Don't touch me. I'm gonna be sick. As it turned out, Napoleon's lack of horses would take the biggest toll on his army, since his tactics relied on speed, maneuverability, and destruction. When he took the fight to the Allies in 1813, he did defeat them and sent them running. But lacking cavalry, he was unable to effectively pursue and destroy. He needed horses. For the Allies, being
Or to just stop and go home.
defeated in battle by a man
Novel
whose army was
concept.
now full of inexperienced conscripts was concerning. So both sides were like, hold up, time out. The Allies were somewhat cornered, and had Napoleon kept going, it's possible he could have won. But instead he agreed to a brief truce with the Austrians mediating between the two sides. When Austria demanded Napoleon make major concessions, Napoleon told them to shove it. Having had their terms rejected, Austria felt now they were justified in saying, well, we tried, and they joined the coalition. Okay everyone, look at us. The boys are back together, but Napoleon is still dangerous, so we need a plan. Any ideas? Ooh, I know. No, forget it. That's stupid.
Oh.
Oh, no.
Oh, come on, go for it.
I've got it! When he approaches, we run away. Genius.
Dude, it worked
He's a
in Russia.
genius. The plan was as follows. Wherever Napoleon advanced, whoever he advanced on would avoid battle, allowing the others to sweep in from the sides and attack the French marshals guarding his flanks. Essentially, the plan was, don't try to fight Napoleon.
Yeah, fight everyone else because nobody else knows the Napoleon battle plan. Especially now that, like, he's lost generations of generals and he's got teenagers running the military
And
at this point.
plan worked tremendously. The Allies scored a number of victories that saw Napoleon move back to the city of Leipzig, where he would make one last major stand as the Allied armies converged in on him from all sides. The stage was set for the biggest and bloodiest battle of the Napoleonic Wars, the Battle of Leipzig. Almost 500,000 troops from over a dozen nations stretched across the battlefield. The French found themselves fighting on all sides for 4 days against the Austrians, Prussians, Swedes, and Russians. It's no wonder.
What is this? We've been seeing this all along. What is this where their eyes are closed and they're just wildly swinging bayonets?
Prussians, Swedes, and Russians. It's no wonder this battle is also sometimes referred to as the Battle of the Nations. The French fought ferociously, but ultimately were no match for the coordinated efforts of the coalition. At one point, in the midst of battle, Saxon troops allied with the French had a team huddle and were like, hey guys, I'm pretty sure the French are losing. Let's switch sides. And so they did. When it became clear that Napoleon couldn't win.
So this was like the closest to a world war, it feels like. No, I guess not. This is the closest to like a battle of a world war that we would see before the actual world wars themselves. Because, yeah, the troops from a dozen different countries all trying to figure this mess out.
He ordered a retreat across the only bridge over the river. The Allies swarmed into the city, and desperate fighting raged in the streets. Okay, Corporal, after everyone has crossed the river, I need you to blow up the bridge.
Nope.
Okay? Not before
Nope.
everyone's crossed. After. You got that? Yes, Colonel, I'm not 5. I can comprehend time.
And
Good.
hit the button.
Wait, did he say before or after? Well, fortune favors the bold.
Yep.
The bridge was blown early, and 30,000 French troops were stranded and captured. A disaster. And with that, the dominoes were beginning to come crashing down on Napoleon. In the south, an army under the British Duke of Wellington had been pushing the French out of Spain for the past few years, and were now.
Why did it take so long for everyone to turn on Napoleon? Is it another one of those things of news traveled so colossally slow back then that some of the people maybe not in the cities or abreast of everything going on, like it took a long time for people to get up to speed? Because you think about how quickly we turn in 2022 on any of our leaders, man. You get caught biting your nails at a funeral, you're out of there. So it's amazing to me that people can just lose after lose after lose, and everyone's still like, yeah, but maybe he's still got something on the ball.
Crossing into France, Austrian armies had pushed into Italy, while Napoleon's old flamboyant cavalry commander, Murat, who Napoleon had made king of Naples, decided to switch sides. German states, many resentful after years under Napoleon's thumb, turned against him, and the Confederation of the Rhine collapsed. Bernadotte invaded Denmark, and they were forced to join the coalition, while the Netherlands were liberated. You'd think Napoleon might have seen the writing on the wall, but he was Napoleon, and so instead, he prepared to keep fighting. As attitudes in Paris were already beginning to turn against him, he called up more conscripts to defend the exhausted.
Who could it? I mean, I guess, like, it could be women at this point because they hadn't called up women yet. Or it's going to be like toddlers. That's about it. Maybe dogs, cats, fish. Fish probably won't work very
Nation. As for the Allies, they weren't sure exactly what they were aiming for here. A few peace offers were floated that may have let Napoleon keep his position, but the British kept throwing around even more money, and eventually, they all agreed that the ultimate aim was the deposition of Napoleon entirely. And so, Napoleon embarked on one of his most famous campaigns to defend the homeland. He
Waterloo?
was completely outnumbered, but the Allied armies had split up and spread out. His army was so small that he could move at lightning speed, and he used this to his advantage. In the famous 6 Days campaign against Prussian General Blücher, he attacked from all directions and defeated Blücher's forces 4 times, only suffering 1/10 of the casualties he inflicted.
By the way, his army was small. 30,000 strong. But still, taking out more than half, 60% of someone's forces.
Even with his back completely to the wall, Napoleon was still Napoleon. Then he turned south to take on Schwarzenberg's army of Bohemia and enjoyed even more victories. However, Napoleon's problem was that he couldn't be everywhere at once, and wherever he wasn't, the Allies continued to push towards Paris.
Dude, it's every game of League of Legends, of Dota, of pick your MOBA.
He made one last-ditch attempt at moving in behind the enemy lines and cutting off their communications, but Paris was in disarray, and the people were sick of war. One ambitious and slightly treacherous politician sent the Allied armies a letter basically saying, "Hey guys, come on in." And so, they did. The city's defenders surrendered, and as the Allied leaders entered Paris, the people cheered them as bringers of peace. Paris had fallen. Quick, marshals, gather your men. We're gonna launch an assault on Paris.
There are no marshals, there are no men, there is no Paris.
Where are my marshals?
Yeah.
They all left and told me to give you this note. Napoleon's marshals had realized what he hadn't. It was over, and they insisted all that was left now, for the good of France, was for him to abdicate. And without the support of his army, Napoleon had no choice. He hoped his son could take his place, but it was decided instead to restore the old Bourbon monarchy. Old King Louis XVI's brother would become the King of France. It was almost like the French Revolution had never even happened. But what will we do with Napoleon?
Yeah, that is... Except millions died and starved and all that stuff. He's at 44 at this point.
We can't have a hyperactive 44-year-old menace running around reigniting revolutionary ideals and plotting his return. Well, why don't we send him... I don't know. There. The location chosen for Napoleon's exile was the small island of Elba, just off the coast of Italy. Napoleon was to rule over the island, and even got to keep the title Emperor of Elba. The Allies must have been in stitches when they came up with that. When he learned what his fate was to be, he drank the poison he had been keeping around his neck. But it had gone out of date, so instead of a quick and painless death, he got a painful stummy-wummy instead.
Aw, poor guy. I mean, it does, like, even in this painting, his stomach, and this is the thing, they probably painted this to be flattering to him, so his gutteroonie was even more distended than it looked in that painting.
Before he left France, he addressed his oldest and closest guard one last time, making an emotional speech that ended with him kissing their flag. And off he went to exile. The deal that was given to him was actually quite generous. His family were given titles, he was to receive a state pension from France, and he was able to receive many distinguished visitors, all eager to come and meet the famed emperor. And he ruled over Elba well, improving infrastructure.
The problem is, if you are Napoleon and you're living in that life of pseudo-luxury, you have to be concerned that someone is going to come for you at literally any given time, and you have nothing you can do about it.
Sure. And introducing many legal and social reforms aimed at improving life on the island. Hey, Napoleon, just coming in to check on how it's all going. Holy smokes! But it wasn't all good. For one thing, he learned of the death of his first wife, Josephine, and was deeply saddened. He was forbidden from seeing his son and current wife, and in Austria, Emperor Francis had ordered a local count to seduce her, so she would forget about Napoleon. Then,
Ew.
the new King Louis XVIII refused to give Napoleon his agreed pension. He was under constant threat of assassination, and there were even rumors that the Allies were thinking of relocating him somewhere even more remote. But the biggest problem was that Napoleon was once the master of Europe. He had lived a thrilling life of adventure, fame, and glory. Now, he found himself on a tiny island in the Mediterranean, and he was bored. Wouldn't it be nice if he could somehow return to France and reclaim his throne? Hey, Napoleon, want to go back to France and reclaim your throne?
There's no... I mean, I know from the little bit of history that I remember, obviously, where this is going, but it's just like... maybe I'm lazy, right? And that's my issue, that I don't have the chutzpah or the motivation to try and take over France at any point. But I'm like, even without the pension, man, maybe you just open up a corner store, bake some baguettes, right? You know, I've seen Beauty and the Beast. I know how 18th, 19th century French towns operate. People routinely break into song. Like that seems like a good life.
I would, Pierre. But how? Well, I was thinking we could just take this boat. Will that work? Surprisingly, yes. Pierre, remember when I told you no one would ever kiss you? Yes, sire. Well,
Dear
pucker
God.
up, boyo. Yay. When Napoleon left Elba...
I want this as an alert for Twitch chat. Like, I love this noise.
Bruh, boyo. Yay. When Napoleon left Elba, it wasn't really the daring escape you might think. He basically had kind of a leaving ceremony, hopped on a ship, and sailed back to France. He brought with him an army of about 1,000 men, and he began his journey to Paris. However, in Paris, there was now a new king, and at first, the people largely accepted him because the last few years of war under Napoleon had brought immense death and economic suffering. That's right, the king is back, baby. Divine right to rule. Don't worry, everyone. I know the economy is kaput, but I and my courtiers will withdraw into this palace, and we will definitely work as hard as we can
to do nothing.
To fix everything. Oh yeah, that's why we got rid of the king. As the Bourbon monarchy began to look more and more like a return to the past, and the returning nobility seemed hellbent on regaining their lost privileges, the people weren't too happy. And so, Napoleon hoped that his glorious return would be met with jubilation. In the end, the reaction was a little mixed, but many were happy to see their old emperor. Your Majesty, it seems that Napoleon is back and marching this way with 1,000 men. That guy?
I just imagine being a small farmer, maybe your land has been taken, you know, you're back to being essentially a serf, and there's Napoleon with 1,000 dudes just riding through your town. You'd just be saying, like, there's no way.
No problem. I have hundreds of thousands of men. Send them to arrest him. Your Majesty, it seems the thousands of men we sent to arrest Napoleon have all joined his side.
Yep.
Well, I'm off to Belgium. If you ever need a king again, be sure to let me know. As Napoleon continued
At least he can put it on his resume.
The king had sent battalions of men to stop him, but they largely comprised of Napoleon's old soldiers, many unhappy with King Louis's military reforms. And so, when ordered to arrest him, they simply couldn't do it. In one famous incident, the troops began to cry out, "Long live the Emperor." When Napoleon reached Paris, with King Louis having fled, he entered unopposed.
It's so and the thing that's so wild to me is that this all happened less than 200 years ago. I don't know. We always think of 2022 as like the future, flying cars, but it's not really. Certainly not that far. Like what in 2222 will people think of this time?
To reclaim his throne, Napoleon was back from the dead. Okay, everyone, now that we've finally gotten rid of that guy, let's try to make sure something like this can never happen again. What's that doing there? Hey, fellow monarchs.
Oh, arguably the worst thing to happen.
This time, Napoleon promised he would be a mucho good boy and not start any wars. But the Allied leaders were having none of it. They declared Napoleon an outlaw and the illegitimate...
Have you seen this man? He's short both in temper and height. Will claim that he's average height for the time, but he's not to be believed, legs treats and will only bite if
ruler
provoked.
of France. Then they declared war, not on France, but on Napoleon himself. And when you have multiple empires declaring war on you as an individual, that's how you know you're a very naughty boy. The Allied powers began making plans to combine their forces and once again invade France. The most immediate threat to Napoleon were the British and Prussians hanging out in nearby Belgium. If Napoleon could knock them out quickly, maybe he could force the Allies to negotiate, and maybe he could hold on to his power. Together, the two armies to the north outnumbered him, so he made a plan to divide them and take them on separately. Historians debate how much of a chance Napoleon had here, but this same strategy of dividing and conquering had worked for him multiple times. He marched north with 125,000.
I can appreciate that Napoleon had slideshows, like he kept receipts to back that stuff up. But he's a lot older. His troops are arguably weaker, and from what we learned earlier, the foreign troops are arguably smarter, so...
men, and took on the Allies in a number of initial engagements, defeating the Prussians before turning to take on the British. But to Napoleon's dismay, miscommunication and hesitation among his marshals allowed both enemy armies to retreat, and crucially, rather than fleeing east, the Prussians moved north, where they could remain in contact with the British. Napoleon sent a force to hold off the Prussians as he moved in on the British, now holding a defensive position at Waterloo. Prussian General Blucher sent word that he would come to Wellington's aid if he could just hold off the French for long enough. Napoleon had to defeat Wellington before the Prussian army could arrive in force, and it was close. The British held the high ground and a number of key defensive buildings across the battlefield. After waiting some hours he didn't have for the ground to dry, Napoleon sent men to assault the Hougoumont farm, but the British-German garrison there held out. French Marshal Ney launched a number of miscalculated cavalry charges at the British lines.
It sounds like, again, the lack of a leadership pipeline is really what's screwing him over, but arguably, I guess that could have gotten him overthrown sooner.
The British formed defensive square formations, and they tore the French cavalry to shreds, while one guy chose the absolute worst time to go on a bender. The French did manage to capture a farmhouse directly in front of the British line, and from there, they unleashed artillery hellfire on the British square formations. And as Napoleon sent his Imperial Guard in to finish the British off, a nervous Wellington knew his lines were at breaking point. But the Prussians had earlier begun to arrive, and now they were arriving in large numbers. And after the British held out and sent the French Imperial Guard running, the French lines panicked, fearing they had been encircled, and they began to flee. The Battle of Waterloo was an Allied victory. And with that, Napoleon's hopes of returning to glory were vanquished. He knew he was defeated. He went to the British and said, "Can I..."
That emoji is just... Oh no! For some reason, it's all bollocks here. There you go. I don't know why I was missing that last little top of the screen earlier, but...
"Please have a house near London?" And the British replied, "No." Instead, to make sure Napoleon was put away once and for all, they sent him to one of the most isolated and remote places they could think of. A tiny island in the Atlantic Ocean, St. Helena. Here, a deeply isolated and depressed Emperor Napoleon would live the remaining years of his life. His house was a wooden bungalow, not exactly on par with the Tuileries Palace. Much to his frustration, his captors referred to him as General, rather than calling him Emperor. His mail was censored, his visitors were vetted. There was almost no way he could escape such an isolated island. But just to be sure, he was guarded by 2,000 British soldiers and 2 ships that circled the island 24 hours a day. He had once been the most powerful man alive, and images of the victorious Napoleon depict a strong leader, hand firmly in jacket. Depictions of Napoleon on St. Helena show a disheveled old man, hand firmly in pants. He had lost everything. And by the way, he was only 46.
Oh my god, I was
so maybe
not
it's
expecting...
about time you...
I was not expecting the hand firmly in pants. Because again, I pointed out earlier why he had his hand in his jacket, so I just assumed, although I guess whatever, discomfort was here, it had progressed at that point.
You know what? You're doing all right, kid.
Yes!
Napoleon fought one last battle while on the island. The battle for his reputation. He spent hours writing his memoirs, espousing his achievements, recording his greatness, and turning himself and his story into a phenomenal legend. And in this battle, he certainly succeeded. His mark on history cannot be denied. After his defeat, the European monarchs had got to work restoring Europe to its traditional balance and reasserting their dominance. But after Napoleon had spread the influence of the French Revolution, these returning monarchs would have a difficult time regaining their absolute control. France returned to the rule of the Bourbons, but it would go on to stage another revolution, and then another one. Reaction to...
I was gonna say, it's like every 20 years at this point.
Napoleon's rule in places like Germany and Italy propelled forward the ideas and feelings of modern unity and nationalism, and his Napoleonic Code still remains the basis of law in various modern countries. The modern world owes a lot to Napoleon's legacy. He remains statistically possibly the greatest military...
So we got, okay, based on Ethan Arsh's war scores, we've got Napoleon Bonaparte, Julius Caesar, the Duke of Wellington, Takeda Shingen, Khalid ibn al-Walid, Hannibal Barca, Ulysses S. Grant, Frederick the Great, Georgy Zhukov, and Alexander... I'm surprised Alexander the Great is at 10.
...general in history, and his revolutionary military tactics changed the face of warfare.
Intuitive understanding of the battlefield, good intelligence, strike at enemy lines of communication. Enemies were often dum-dums. That's what turned on him. His marshals became the dum-dums, and more.
He was the last truly great leader to both lead his armies in battle while retaining total political control over a vast empire. There's still hope for Joe Biden, but the man remains somewhat of an enigma, and we still aren't sure exactly what to...
The difference is Napoleon was like a fifth the age of Biden when he took over.
...make of him in some regards. Was he the champion of the French Revolution, spreading equality wherever he went? Or did he betray it by making himself an absolute monarch and restricting certain liberties? Was he an ambitious and aggressive conqueror, hell-bent on bringing Europe to its knees? Or was he simply defending himself against an aggressive Europe?
Can he be
hell-bent on
both?
reducing his power? Some things will continue to be debated. Napoleon died at the age of 51, officially of stomach cancer, but some believe he may have been poisoned. The British buried him in a tin coffin, inside a mahogany coffin, inside a lead coffin, inside another mahogany coffin. I guess this time, they wanted to make sure he stayed where they put him. In 1840, his remains were moved to Paris, where they now rest under the dome of Les Invalides. The man from humble origins, with huge ambition, ruthless determination, immaculate skill on the battlefield, and a hefty dose of luck, who was determined to make his mark on history, did just that.
It's always fascinating to me, those people that get buried, or I guess not buried, entombed rather, in public locations like that. Because, again, in this day and age, we see so frequently systems of government where, every 5 years, they want to completely undo everything that the people before them did, and vice versa. So that people could stay in agreement for 200 years about, like, let's make this area be this person's memorial is, like OverSimplified said, it's a testament to what they did.
There is no immortality, he said, but the memory that is left in the minds of men. And in that sense, Napoleon knew he would live on forever. Oh, and to reiterate, he was definitely average height for the time.
Good to know. Oh, and a shout out to everyone involved in the making of this production. I always feel like OverSimplified has to have like a gigantic team. Writers, animators, all that kind of stuff. See, now I'm just like, when do we get new stuff? I've reached that point of the OverSimplified fandom where I'm like, okay, we had videos, now want more videos right away, ASAP, and world doesn't work though. And see, that's why I want to try and start making some of my own, like, original stuff as well. It's just tricky it's tricky to make original stuff when people are used to, like, me uploading every day. So then it's like, how do I take the time off to work on some bigger projects and all that kind of stuff? And that's the thing that I've been struggling with. But I'm happy to finish this. If there are other OverSimplified, if there are other channels, if there's anything you want me to check out, make sure to leave a comment down below and let me know. I know this is the longest video I've done in quite some time, so hopefully you were here for it, you enjoyed it. Take care, my friends, and I will see you for the next one.